We've got a little bit of applause for you to welcome you onto the program.
Oh, okay.
That is for you. I got to say, you know what? We are excited to talk to you this morning because, I mean, you are, you've been called a lot of things. The godfather of punk rock and roll, the father of garage rock. You have had a 50-plus year history with the Standells. And, of course, most recently you were touring with Rick Derringer with the McCoys and the Standells. I want to know, tell us a little bit about recent touring. And, I mean, as I understand, it was the first time you guys have been on stage together since 1966. Is that correct?
Yeah, we had both been on the PBS show, Cornerstones of Rock, which is part of the Soundstage series that was broadcast last year, and that's going to be broadcast again this year worldwide.
Right.
So, but it's really the first concert that we've been on stage together with Rick.
I know you guys were doing some. Correct me if I'm wrong. You last month or so, you had done a couple outings and played a couple performances. And what were the crowd reception seeing the Standells again? I mean, I know you've been touring a lot in the last few years and doing shows, but how? I mean, with the McCoys and the Standells, I mean, it's got to be a trip for audiences to see you guys both together.
Well, it's a thrill. Personally, I think Rick is a tremendous talent. One of the few people that have survived.
Right.
So many have not, and he survived, and he's, if nothing else, he's gotten better than he was back in the '60s with the McCoys. I mean, he's just one of the best guitarists and terrific singer. So it was an honor to be on the show with him, and we kind of complement each other, I think.
It's crazy to think, though. I mean, the music of the Standells is, I mean, you've been in the game longer than 50 years. I mean, did you ever think about the relevancy, how this music is still relevant in 2017? Does that blow your mind? I mean, it must be crazy for you.
Well, of course, when we began, I never imagined, this would happen. I hoped, like most groups do, but I never imagined. And when we recorded Dirty Water, as a matter of fact, we never thought it would be a hit. In fact, we recorded it in 1965, and it wasn't a hit until, almost a year later. It was quite some time, and we had forgotten the song, and we had to relearn it.
I mean, in that song, of course, and obviously a few others from that era, I mean, they have gone on, people have covered them, and they found new audiences and inspired so many people, and of course, that's where the title, the father of garage rock and the godfather of punk rock. Are you comfortable with these titles that they've given you?
Well, yeah. I mean, I accept almost anything except being referred to as frat rock. I hate that terminology. I don't know who came up with it, but they ought to be shot.
Right.
We never played fraternities, and we certainly. The other one is Toga Rock, which is an album that they have Dirty Water on. I hate that phrase. I don't know why. I guess it's just a bunch of idiots running around acting stupid, and I don't associate myself with that.
Of course. That's a pretty great title. I mean, because you think about the music that you've been involved with, it has gone on to influence generation after generation, and it seems that the punk rock movement really embraced the music of the Standells, and there's countless covers, and it's kind of interesting to think that this music would be so embodied by a generation removed. I mean, did that come to a surprise to you when you started hearing about these covers showing up on the punk records?
Well, like you said, it was a surprise to me when the group folded, which was right around 1969. We all kind of went our ways,
right.
And it wasn't until like the mid 70s and 80s that whole genre started to reappear, and And I found myself totally amazed one day when I was reading the L.A. Times in the calendar section, and they were referring to this this group, the Pandoras, as the Standells. And I said, what? Because until that time I had no idea that people had picked up on us, and the more I read, of course, the more I realized that we had indeed influenced a lot of these young groups, like the Ramones, Sid Vicious and the Stooges, and even heavy metal. I know
right.
Guns N' Roses talks about us quite a bit. They're fans of ours. And, anybody that ever appears in Boston, I mean, it's almost a necessity that they do Dirty Water.
Right.
Anybody and everybody has done Dirty Water, including Bruce Springsteen, just about everybody that's been there.
I mean, it's one of those songs. It also, I mean, you guys kind of embodied this, I don't want to say confrontational, an approach that, resonates with a lot of the punk ethos that is out there. And it's kind of exciting. And speaking of which, only a few years ago, the Standells put out a record titled Bump. And that was the first record that I guess you guys had put together since 1967, if I'm not mistaken.
About 50, almost 50 years span.
It's crazy. Can you tell us a little bit about how you decided to get that album together and what that process was? Kind of returning to the garage, if you will, to make this album.
Well, that's a really nice request. We had, a certain amount of fans out there that were telling us, that we should make new recordings, but we couldn't quite find the right time to do it, and breaking a tour to actually sit down and be in the studio. And the other thing, we didn't have any songs. And so, we finally decided that we were going to do this. And in fact, we went into, we had written a couple of songs, and we went into a studio, and it just doesn't seem to work. And the thing that was missing, believe it or not, was being in a comfortable environment. Dirty Water was recorded in a garage, in Armand Steiner's garage. It was converted into a recording studio in his parents' home.
Wow.
And he was a genius, by the way. But we really lacked that, the comfortable environment and being able to come and go when we please. So we actually built our own garage studio, and in my drummer's garage in his home. It was actually partially converted, but we made it into a studio.
Wow.
And so in doing that, and being in that environment where we're all together and doing the songs, then the creativity really started to gel. And it was not only me, but the other guys in the group. I give them as much credit because they really started writing some good songs. And then we pooled our efforts too, and did several songs together. And what came out, I think, was what I had originally anticipated in an album. I wanted to pretend like we had always continued to record
right.
since the 60s. And, so that album really took you from the raunchy us against them kind of lyrics with it's all about the money and
right.
Mr. 1%. And, where both of them really poke at the wealthiest 1%, and basically we all know what that's about.
Of course,
the 1% gets all the tax breaks, and now they're getting even more. They can't have enough, and they're taking it from the poor people, the people that really need it, the poor people, the middle class. They're taking the medical care and everything away from them. So I thought back then that I would address these issues. And that's why we came out with these two songs.
I was going to comment, those two songs were a part of my next question, which is I mean, they're pretty, honestly, it's a radical standpoint to be able to, as an artist, point your finger at the establishment in terms of like the distribution of wealth in the country. It obviously falls in line with the tradition of the Standells. I mean, because this is not, in a sense, new territory that you guys have kind of covered, because it's, you've talked about the middle class and these types of topics. Were you really feeling the sense of that I got to make this statement on this record?
Yeah, absolutely. It's really, kind of an extension of where we were at back in the 60s.
Right.
I mean, sometimes Good Guys Don't Wear White was all about the middle class.
Exactly.
And how you shouldn't be judged by your color or your wealth, but what kind of person you are. And Why Pick on Me? Then we had some other songs that were protest songs like All Fall Down. So it's really kind of a continuation of where we were back then and where we are today. And, in some respects, things haven't changed much. There's still a disparity between the wealthy and the poor. In fact, that's the biggest disparity ever. It's the wealthiest 1%. They control. They have about 90 some odd % of the wealth in the country, and then everybody else, kind of falls by the wayside. That's never happened. Even under Eisenhower, if you remember, they had tax brackets back then.
Right.
And some people were paying like 85% taxes. And I'm not saying go back to that, but let's get back to redistributing that. And there's many wealthy people that agree with that.
Sure.
And that's kind of what we were aiming at anyway.
Right. I mean, and it's, it's just absolute fairness and humane, living. It has gotten out of hand, and not to get sidetracked, but I mean, that is the, it is great to hear that kind of, ferocity on a brand new Standells record. It is kind of, it's refreshing, and I commend you on those songs. I think that they're outstanding songs, and they continue in the tradition. And
well, thank you.
You're welcome. And I've got to ask. I mean, as I mentioned at the top of the interview, you've been doing the Standells work for over 50 years. You obviously you founded the group back in '62, but I didn't really realize that you actually had a history prior to the Standells. You'd released a couple solo singles before that. How did you get started doing the solo business before you even started the Standells?
Well, I was, as you said, I was a single artist, but I mean, it was just right in high school. I had a rock band together, and we were playing high school hops and things like that. And I mean, back then, you're talking about the late '50s, and I mean, my contemporaries back then were like Richie Valens. I knew Richie. That we were doing competing gigs around, doing wedding receptions and quinceañeras and things like that. So I was discovered by this record company owned by Eddie Davis, and he signed me up, and we did several songs, not with my band, but just as a solo. And the very first song I recorded was a doo-wop ballad called Dearest.
Right.
And the flip side was Patty Ann. You can find all these songs, by the way, on YouTube.
Yeah, we were listening to some of those earlier, and I mean, to be honest with you, they're gorgeous little records.
Oh, thanks. Well, back then, and even in the '60s, I mean, you had to get it right in the studio.
Right.
Nowadays, you can record practically anywhere with digital recording and get it pretty well. And but back then you had to get it, just the sound. You had to get everything right the first time when you recorded it, and you had to get that sound, whatever the sound was. It had to be in the studio. But nowadays it's not so much.
I mean, obviously you guys are. I mean, this is probably 2-track at this point. I would assume, or maybe 4.
Yeah, it was 2-track back then, and. You did everything live. The band, the singing, it was all done live. And you didn't have the ability to overdub or any of that stuff. Dirty Water was done on 3 tracks, so we didn't we didn't have that much advancement.
You waited several years just to get that one track.
Yeah,
it's incredible. And you released a few of these singles, and then eventually you came up with the name, the Standells, and you put together a group. And at one point it was Larry Tamblyn and the Standells, and then it was just the Standells. How did the transformation, I guess, putting the group together and eventually, I guess, getting signed? How did all that work?
You've read up on our history. A lot of people don't even know that. At one time the group was called Larry Tamblyn and the Standells, and I think mostly it was to capitalize on my last name, because that time my movie actor brother Russ Tamblyn was a pretty big star. And so we did that. I was the lead singer of the group, and so it naturally followed suit. And we played that way for quite some time. And then the other guys in the group said, "Well, we don't want your name up there in front anymore." So we just called it the Standells, and that's where it came about. But our first job, as you mentioned, was 1962, and it was in this nightclub in Hawaii.
Wow!
And how many kids get this kind of break? I was all of 19 years old, playing in this nightclub in Hawaii, and we alternated with a complete Asian floor show, and they had all sorts of entertainers. They had dancers, they had kabuki dancers, they had comedians, they had actors that put on a little act, and then they had a stripper. And we came on after the stripper. What a place to be.
Right. Everybody wants to see the band after the stripper is done.
Yeah, that's it. And it was tough at first. There was a lot of resentment. They would rather see the stripper up there. Her name was Mickey Moto, and they would rather see her than these bunch of kids up there. But eventually, we gained a really good following there, and people started coming to see us, and it was really a lot of fun. And if only it had stayed like that, because we were booked right from there to this horrible nightclub in Fresno, and we played for this. It was right. I remember this today. It was in this right near the railroad tracks during their foggy season there, and it was very depressing to begin with.
Right.
And then we had crowds of like 5 or 6 people a night, and to go from this crowded the club in Hawaii to this little rundown place in Fresno was really, really depressing. And I remember one time that this heavy woman, she must have weighed about 300 pounds. She was drunk and she passed out on the stage.
Oh, jeez.
And we had, nobody would move her, nor could they. And so we had to spend the night, performing and stepping over her.
Oh, jeez. Welcome to Fresno. There it is. Wow.
And so we played up and down the coast of California quite a bit, before we, had our super big break.
Leading into that, I mean, I'd read this before, but Gary Leeds, a.k.a. Gary Walker of the Walker Brothers, he was at one point drumming in the Standells. Was this during that time?
Gary was with us up until 1964. He was actually played on our first recording, Shake, with Liberty Records, and but we weren't going quite the way he wanted us to go, and he had first two. We had gained a certain following with the name Standells, and by then we actually had done a movie called Get Yourself a College Girl, and we were unknowns, and we did that movie, and so we gained quite a bit of a following. But Gary wanted us to change our name. He watched this movie, Village of the Damned. So he wanted us to change our names to the children, and then bleach all of our hair blonde.
Wow.
Like those kids in that movie.
Right, of course. Wow.
And I just wouldn't do it, because because of the fact, I thought it was a dumb idea, but but the other thing is that we had a certain following already, and I didn't want to change it, and so he left the group, and he joined up with Scott Engel, John Moss. Coincidentally, John Moss and his sister, John and Kathy, were in the same nightclub right before we went there in Hawaii.
Oh, is that right?
This is just how small the world is.
Absolutely.
This agency that booked us also booked them, and then Scott, I met him. When I belonged to the DeMolays for a while, he was a member. So I knew these guys from before, and Gary hadn't known them back there, which is really interesting. But he joined with these guys, and they had a great idea. All these groups were coming from Europe over here. First the Beatles, and then we had Dave Clark 5, and every other one that came over here. Well, they formed, and they went to England. But the interesting thing is they called themselves the Walker Brothers. They weren't really brothers, and they changed their names legally, and they all bleached their hair blonde like Gary wanted to do.
Well, he had a vision. I mean, that is incredible. I mean, and you had mentioned it. You guys have been cited, the Standells, for being, one of the first groups to really kind of, out of nowhere, really kind of grow your hair when it was not, say, in vogue. I mean, before the Beatles really had even come to America, and you started kind of dressing in that style.
Yeah, we did. We did actually. We read about the Beatles in this European magazine.
Wow.
Before they even hit here in the States, and we saw what they were doing there, and we just realized it was only a matter of time before they took off here, and so we started appearing. We originally got wigs to wear, before we let our hair grow out, and it was quite something. This club we were playing in called Peppermint West, which was an offshoot of the Peppermint Lounge in New York. We started appearing with this long hair there, and they hung out a big poster out in the front saying Beatlemania. This was back in 1963. We had a magazine, Tiger Beat, came out and did a big spread on it, and it was quite something. And we went from there to play at the Thunderbird Lounge, which is a big casino back then, in Vegas, and we were billed as America's answer to the Beatles.
Oh wow!
And in fact, they made up a story that we were going to go to Europe to challenge them, which was, right, you're going to go challenge the Beatles? Sure.
Right.
Anyway, then we came back from there, and PJ's nightclub wanted to sign us, and but they had just parted ways with who was it? It was right before us, a very big name, but they decided to. They said they wanted us, but we had to cut our hair off, and in order to play there, it was a pretty nice club, and so that's what we did, and then eventually we grew the hair back, but it was we had some, and I'm really glad you read up on this, because a lot of people, they read this, some of the early reviews in Standells albums, and one of them said that we were a bunch of clean living guys until we met Ed Cobb.
Oh,
and,
right.
He changed our clothes and our style and everything else, and that nothing could be further from the truth.
Well, I mean, you guys were already going. I mean, it was even prior to that period. I mean, you were already performing and doing the shows all around town. So I mean, it's
yeah.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah, they even said that Ed Cobb booked us, which he didn't.
Right.
Our manager, Bert Jacobs, booked us. So they were making him into our Svengali, if we want to call him that. And I liked Ed. I mean, he was a good guy, but he certainly didn't shape our career, except for writing some wonderful songs.
You mentioned the PJs, and of course, the big record on Liberty was in person at PJ's. And that was, I mean, that was kind of the big, it was a live album. And it was kind of your first, I guess full format record. What was the excitement like around that record when you guys signed to Liberty and you kind of, here we are, we're putting this thing out. Was there a lot of kind of excitement around that album?
It was excitement, but it was different. They're adults and much more conservative type crowd. Although, we had our share of. I remember early on the Rolling Stones came in there and kind of floored everybody with their long hair
right.
and everything, and everybody kind of fell over when they saw them. They came in to see us, and so it was exciting, and we drew lots of crowds there. In fact, Trini Lopez was the one that was in there before us.
Wow,
he had recorded an album in there, and so when we came in, we started drawing such big crowds that they had to expand the room. And so it went from being, 150 seats to seating about 800 people.
Wow!
And it eventually became the Starwood. They sold it after we left. Sometime after we left, it became the Starwood. But we drew big crowds in there. Right up until we started being booked out of town more. We played in much better venues, like in San Francisco at the Tiger Room, the Tiger Go-Go, they called it,
right.
at the airport there, and we played there, and then we were during this time, Dirty Water started to after we recorded it in 1965. It started to get a little play on this radio station in Orlando, this little radio station called WLOF. And it got really popular there and went to #1 on their charts. And then Miami picked it up after that, and then it started to spread. And that wasn't until 1966 that May, June, and July that it really started to climb the charts, and that's when we started touring and stopped doing the nightclubs.
Wow! So I mean, and there was obviously a momentum behind you guys because of this, success isolated in these other cities. I would imagine did a lot of these TV appearances. Obviously, you were on the Munsters and the Bing Crosby his show, and you were starting to get these types of appearances. Was that all kind of coming together at once? Is this all, or was it a chain reaction?
Yeah, that's a good question. We actually started doing these films before we were even, names, before we recorded Dirty Water. We did the Get Yourself a College Girl, like I said,
right.
in 1964, and we were on with other acts like the Dave Clark Five and the Animals, although their portions in the movie were actually filmed in London. So we were the only actual American rock group that was actually filmed here. But then we did, then the Beatles started happening, and all these television shows were looking for a similar type group that they could book, and have on their shows because of the excitement the Beatles were creating. And we were called to do the Bing Crosby show, and it was we played the fictional part, the part of this fictional group
right.
Called the Love Bugs. The title of that particular show was called Bugged by the Love Bug, and it was exciting for us because I got to work with Bing Crosby.
Absolutely.
My father. Was he died when I was like 14, but he was a big fan of Bing Crosby's, and so it was really exciting to me to be on the show with him, and we did some songs on there which were originals, and then we did one song which he sang with us, and that clip is on YouTube.
Wow, what an honor! I mean,
yeah, it really was, and he, is he sang Kansas City, and he did a damn good job on that song. I got to tell you, he was a jazz singer,
of course,
you know,
right.
and he really had the feel for it. There's no question about it. And he wasn't like a Pat Boone. Pat Boone, in my opinion, was stiff. He could never do rock and roll. And
Right.
he was doing Tutti Frutti and all these Little Richard songs. But, Bing really had a good feel for it. And but I've got to tell you, a funny story is that when we started, we got ready to do this song with him, and the director yelled, "Cameras rolling," and right before we started, I started singing, "I'm dreaming of a white Christmas." And everybody, I mean, all of the, how these crews are anyway,
Right.
and they were just laughing and rolling on the floor.
That's great.
And Bing Crosby looks over at me and says, very slyly, he says, "You're putting me on." And he was just a wonderful, gracious person. I can't say enough about him. He was like a father figure, and in many ways, there's been books out about him. One written by his son Gary that said he was abused by Bing. That's a crock.
Right.
All of his other family members said that didn't happen. So he was just a wonderful person. It was a pleasure doing the show with him. And then, almost 6 months later, then we were called to do the Munsters. And that was a thrill because that was my favorite TV show at the time. And they were going to originally have us play a fictional group, but they said, well, why not just call it, go by your real name? And so we did, and even our real names were used. So that was a thrill, working with Fred Gwynn and Yvonne DiCarlo, such wonderful professionals. And, Yvonne DiCarlo actually sang a number in there, which that was her singing. She was a Broadway actress. It's very, very well known. So she could belt out songs. And then Butch Patrick, who was Eddie Munster, Butch Patrick has been a friend for all of these years.
But I wanted to ask you about the Munsters. You guys, you mentioned. I mean, this is the height of Beatlemania, and they get you to sing. What is it? I want to hold your hand on the Munsters. How did that come about? The decision to we're going to get this fictitious group to do a Beatles song.
Well, that's a good question. We didn't want to do the song, but it was required in our contract. So we did it. But the problem with that, and I tell people they don't understand, is that we had to record it there in the studio sound stage. And the studio sound stages were very primitive back then. And we all crowded around one microphone and did it. And then they insisted that we all sing. One of the guys in the group could not sing. He thought he could, but he couldn't. And he was the closest to the mic. So there were some pretty sour notes in that. And so, we had these, reviews of the group saying they did a woeful version of I Want to Hold Your Hand. Well, we did what we were told to do, and it was under the worst circumstances you can imagine. But, we did some other good songs on there. Do the Ringo, which was written by Pat and Lolly Vegas, and some other songs. But we basically did, the material they wanted us to do.
Which is exciting because you guys are in this, you're in L.A. and you're getting these opportunities. And, I know that you guys released some singles on a few different labels. One of the Standells tracks, Don't Say Goodbye, you guys recorded at Gold Star with Sonny Bono. Was he the producer on that track?
Yes. Sonny, like the producer we had before, Dick Glasser, had his own style. And I don't think either one of them were really the kind of producers we needed. They both had their sounds. Dick Glasser was more into pop, and he had some downright stupid ideas. Like one thing when we did Standells Live at PJ's, he took and sped up all of the music on the tape so that he thought it sounded more exciting when they were sped up, but it also made it sound like, a little bit like Mickey Mouse doing it.
Right, a Chipmunks record.
But Sonny was a protege of Phil Spector, and he got into that wall of sound type of music, and I mean, you can hear, 4 or 5 guitars, 3 basses, and 3 drums, and it had that sound that he and they just overdubbed, and they created what they call the wall of sound, and that's what they did was on this The Boy Next Door, which was our first record with Sonny, and well, I think it's a good song. It just, I sang it. It's a ballad, and I didn't feel it was the right song for us, but we did it, because that's what he wanted us to do. He wrote the song, and actually Cher sang on some of the background parts.
Wow. How funny is that? I mean, and it's interesting because, you mentioned Sonny Bono being, associated with Phil Spector and the Wall of Sound, and they use a lot of the session musicians, the Wrecking Crew guys, on a lot of their sessions. Were they using you guys as the band to record and track, or did they have to bring in other guys? How did that session work?
They used us plus the Wrecking Crew.
Is that right?
Yeah. Hal Blaine is a good Facebook friend of mine.
Oh, right,
and,
of course.
I really enjoy him, and there's stories about Carol Kane. I don't remember her being on the session. I don't think she was with them during the early days, but he certainly was. And I also worked with Hal on a couple of other things, but. They were there, and Tommy Tedesco.
Right, of course.
I had done some things with him. In fact, Tommy played guitar on one of my early records on Dearest, and some of the other ones he played guitar on. So,
gosh, that must have been some of the earliest work of Tommy's. He must have just gotten out in L.A. around that time.
Yeah.
Wow.
And you know who else? Who else played on some of our songs was Glenn Campbell.
Is that wow? Is that right? Jeez.
Glenn was a session musician.
Of course.
He was one of the best guitarists around, and he played on a couple of the early things. He overdubbed on the Shake, right. and on Peppermint Beetle, which was the flip side of that. Again, you had a producer that had absolutely no feel for it whatsoever, and what was supposed to be this loud, raunchy rock song turned into what I call almost a polka. In fact, with doo-wop singers in the background going, ooh, wee, ooh. And I wanted it to be like a Joey D and the Starlighters wild, raunchy rock song.
Right.
And so he really messed that up. That's the way it was in those days.
Of course.
You kind of went by what the producer wanted. Well, with Sonny, he wanted, the wall of sound, and we weren't the Righteous Brothers, and so we did what we had to do. So it wasn't until Ed Cobb that Ed Cobb really kind of let us sound the way we sounded.
Do you think Ed Cobb's producing kind of really brought that sound? I mean, that is the the quintessential sound of Dirty Water, and Sometimes Good Guys Don't Wear White. I mean, that has this. I mean, this is the sound of garage rock as it's been defined. How did the relationship work with him producing and you guys playing? What was that like? Coming into the studio and realizing that he's getting it down.
That's a good question, and this is quite a story too. In that Ed had written this song "Dirty Water," which he played for us.
Right.
Played a demo with him singing the lead on it. Now Ed singing was, he was originally part of the Four Preps, so he didn't have a rock voice at all.
Right.
And so we weren't very impressed with the song, the way he presented it to us. It was just kind of a standard blues song. And so I said to Ed, well, let us do our thing on it and kind of arrange it to the way we like to do it. And so he said, sure. So he was really easy going back then. That was cool. It worked. He was like a fifth member. And so we came back. We created, Tony Valentino was the guitar player. He created the guitar riff, which is so famous and so many guitarists have picked up on. And, not because he was a great guitarist, but he wasn't a great guitarist. That's why the riff is so great.
Right.
Dick Dodd sang the song, and he created a lot of the lyrics in it. And I created the different kind of arrangement on the chord structure. Instead of hitting a standard seventh, I had an extended seventh, which made it sound a bit different. So overall, it ended up sounding quite a bit different from the way Ed had presented to us. But it worked. I'm thrilled with what we did on it. But it wasn't when the record came out. This is a funny story. When the record came out, after all the arranging we did on it, Ed gives the arranging credits to Lincoln Mayorga, and Lincoln Mayorga was brilliant. I mean, he's a brilliant arranger, conductor, and I've been a big fan of his. But he didn't set foot inside that studio. So to have him listed as doing the arrangements on it was just flabbergasting to us.
I mean, it's funny because back in those days, I mean, that wasn't unheard of. I mean, some people were getting songwriting credits, that didn't have anything to do with the tracks. I mean, it was kind of a standard part of practice in business back in those days.
Oh yeah, even today, it was one song that they released years later that we had recorded and sat on the shelves. That I wrote and sang, and when they released it years later, they gave Ed Cobb the writing credit for it. And it's not a big deal because the song called "Take a Ride" was not a big hit or anything, but it's just the idea that nobody bothered to look and see who actually wrote it, and they should know that the songs I did. I wrote most of them.
Right. That's incredible. I mean, it's funny, because you guys, you have these hits that are, they have this sound, and of course, you mentioned the Rolling Stones, which was one of the big tours you guys were on. How did all of these gigs kind of come about, where you're getting offers from the Stones to go on the road? How was that just the next logical step because you had these hits?
I mean, we originally started doing our own tour. In fact, our manager was booking them just slightly ahead of us. I mean, we went out there out to Florida, where we were huge, and so we went right from playing in a nightclub. To a pretty conservative audience, to all these wild teenagers meeting us at the airport. There were hundreds of teenagers out there with signs and everything.
Wow.
And it was just like we were like the Beatles getting off the plane, And it was just going from one gig to another one, and they didn't always turn out right, even though we were big. It was one he booked that we arrived, and it wasn't a concert hall at all. It was a cow pasture.
Wow!
But we did that, and during that time we did the Michael Douglas show, and anybody that's on YouTube, and that's an interesting show. I didn't see that until years later. That was caught right during that first tour that we were doing, and right when Dirty Water was still climbing the charts, and we did it live, which is interesting. So that's a pretty important part of the Standells history. So Anyway, it wasn't until after that we, and then right in the middle of that tour, our bass player quit, Gary, and we had to pick up this other bass player in Florida. His name was Dave Burke. And we hardly even knew him. And we had to have somebody, and we hardly even knew him. And he was this, Southern hick, and he wasn't used to all the fame and glamour and everything, and he didn't quite take it right. So he lasted with us less than a year. In fact, he didn't play on any of our album cuts. I know years later, we got contacted by his brother, some shyster in New York, and he called our music agent and said, where are the royalties on my brother? I'm handling his estate, and we just said, well, he hasn't got any royalties. He wasn't part, of any of the big recordings, He said, oh, yes, he was. I heard his voice on them.
Oh, jeez.
I could tell his voice, And so we just said, okay, well, you prove it then,
Right.
The burden is on you to prove it, and, of course, you never did. So, that we had to, we played up and down, and then finally, was it after a few months that was still in 1966 that the Rolling Stones already had this tour booked, and so that they requested the Standells and also the McCoys. And the McCoys at that time had the #1 record, and ours was still climbing the charts. So, funny story about the McCoys is that they were just a bunch of kids. Rick was like 17 years old when we recorded that song, and but we went before that tour. We went into this clothier in Greenwich Village. That's where you went to get all the cool clothes.
Right.
And this guy had these new suit jackets that he just got in, and he said, "Oh, these just arrived from Europe, and they're nobody else has them, and we just really liked them." And so he sold us the jackets, and we got on the Stones plane, and we got our seats, and in walked the McCoys. They've got the same jackets. So the guy told him the same thing,
Right.
And so we had to agree to trade off the suit jackets, every other concert.
That's great.
That's kind of the way it went, and it was a wild tour.
That is fun. It's funny is we do a segment on the program where we talk about this day in rock and roll history. If you were ever wondering what you're doing today in 1966, you were playing the Baltimore Civic Arena, so you can mark that.
Well, doing those concerts. I mean, we were doing 1 and 2 concerts a day,
right.
And after a while, it became a blur. There was very few of them that I remember. I remember the one that we did in Massachusetts. That was very memorable because there was a riot during the concert. Everybody ran towards the stage, and they were shooting off tear gas, and
wow,
they had to stop the concert, and that was quite wild.
Jeez.
I remember that. That was Lynn. Massachusetts.
Wow.
I remember one in Canada that we did. That same thing. The kids all were rushed the stage, and they were fighting with the security guards. I remember that. But everything else was kind of a blur, except for one concert we did in Salt Lake City. That was later on, and I'll never forget that because after all the riots and kids trying to tear our clothes off and go into this very conservative audience that just merely applauded after every song that was done, and that really pissed Mick Jagger off. He was so angry. He was cursing, and I remember that pretty well.
That's pretty. One of the interesting stories that the Standells have, and you want to talk about, being. If you are the godfather of punk rock, this is probably one of the most punk rock things. You guys got banned for a track, Try It. It turned into kind of a controversial track. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because I know you guys had to debate over this track, but it's so interesting. Why do you think that they targeted, out of all of the bands and all of the songs that were available at that time, why did you think that they came after you guys and that song?
Yeah, well, that's a really good question, and you got to realize the politics at the time. is that most radio stations were very conservative,
Right.
and they were very afraid, and they were afraid of getting their FCC licenses pulled. And so when Gordon McClendon, who was the culprit behind us out of Dallas, Texas, he owned KLIF, and they also programmed for another number of radio stations throughout the nation. He came out with this, and he was very conservative. He was like a moral majority person, and
Right.
A friend of J.L. Hunt was just this big right winger.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, and he came out with this committee that he formed to judge the lyric content in songs. And I don't know if you saw some of these things on our. If you go to our Facebook page, we have some news clips from that. He came out on Billboard magazine saying, "We're tired of the lyrics of these songs that we have to play, and we're decided to do something about it, and so we're going to stop playing, records with objectionable lyrics." But the thing was that at that time, I mean, you had the Rolling Stones with "Let's Spend the Night Together." You had a number of songs, like you said, that would have been fared far less than our song, "Try It," that he could have picked on. But I really honestly think that he picked on the Standells because we weren't as big as the Stones, and we were a much better target. And he actually not only refused to play our song, but he went on a national campaign and showed our record on news stations. Actually appeared on the news stations. He spent money to do this. Showed our record and said, "This is an example of an obscene record,
Wow.
encouraging young girls to have sex." and we advise you parents not to let your children buy these, and we advise the radio station not to play it. So at that time, "Try It" was considered to be our next number one hit, and like Billboard magazine said that. If we've got a clip of Billboard magazine said it's the Standells' next number one hit, and all these stations jumped on that song. But as soon as McClendon came out with a statement, they all quit playing it.
Oh, jeez.
With the exception, of some that were brave enough to continue it, like KRLA in Los Angeles. They continued to play
Right.
it. The other station, which was at that time became the bigger station, was KHJ, who refused to play it. So you had that throughout the country. It was number one in Los Angeles, and yet one of the stations refused to play it. And that's the way it was. And it really the sales took a nosedive because of it.
Right.
Because it stopped getting airplay. And we had, at the time this was all happening, we were in Texas doing some concerts over there, and we got to talking with some of McClendon's employees there, and we got the inside scoop on some pretty greedy things that happened that McClendon was involved in. And let's just say he was a major hypocrite. The lyrics in "Try It," by the way, were, "By the way you look, I can tell that you want some action. Action is my middle name. Come over here, pretty girl, I'll give you satisfaction. But two are needed for this game. I'll give you sweet love you've never had before." Now, you tell me how that's objectionable.
It is. I mean, honestly, at the time, I'm sure it definitely hurt record sales, but it certainly, over the years, that's quite the mythology of being a band that is, targeted in such a way. It kind of adds a mystique, and it makes, it adds this element of danger that you may not have ever thought about prior to that. It's quite fascinating.
It has, and I really, to this day, think that if we had a better record company,
yes,
like Columbia or Capitol. Now, Tower was a subsidiary of Capitol, but they operated independently and used their own distribution, which was just basically rack jobbers. But they refused it. We wanted to sue McClendon for libel, which would have been perfect. Hey, can you imagine something like this that was played out in court? It would have been perfect, but they were scared to death of them. And in fact, we actually think that they made a deal with him that that he would play our next record, if we just kind of backed off on this one. And it really hurt. I got to tell you, it really hurt at the time because the next record wasn't. It was our album "Can't Help But Love You," which was a departure from our sound.
Right.
It was more of a blues sound. This is when Ed Cobb started getting full of himself, and he didn't listen to the group anymore. He had his own ideas, and that was one of them, was to do this blues song. And in fact, he had a bunch of R&B players on the session. We didn't even get to play on our own session.
Oh, jeez.
And so that was the next song that he played. And, of course, it did make the charts, but it didn't go anyplace. And that was really the death of the Standells. But we go back. I want to go back and talk about, you asked about Art Linkletter. He had this show on at the time called House Party, and he had a segment called Let's Talk. And we would have various factions on it that would debate each other. And it could be any subject in the world. Well, he decided to have McClendon versus the Standells. And we had learned from McClendon's employees, what a hypocrite this man was. And so some things we couldn't say because we didn't have firsthand proof of. We do know that there was some pretty nasty things that was involved in. And some information was fed to the audience members. They held this debate in it was the old Moulin Rouge, but they had converted it and called it the Hullabaloo Club, no association with the TV series. And it was a big auditorium, and it was just full of teenagers. And so they had us versus McClendon in there, and a lot of the audience had information that was pertinent, about McClendon. And so every once in a while, you'd hear somebody yell, "What about your niece, McClendon?" His face got all red, and he'd look out to see where that came from, and and then somebody yelled out about the baseball game. He had a scam going on that were his. They had faked being at the baseball games and having a play-by-play announcer. And it actually has somebody sitting in the studio there with sound effects.
Oh, gee.
And they have somebody call in what was happening from a game. So it sounded like they were at the game calling it as it was happening, but they really weren't. And they got in a lot of trouble from the FCC on this. That we could use, but we massacred them on this debate. I mean, it got to the point where I was saying things like, well, what about, you call our song dirty, and filthy, you can't prove a thing on it. Can you tell us any objectionable lyrics? And he was silent, and I said, what about songs of your day? What does birds do it, bees do it mean? Well, that was different, Well, what did it mean? Well, that was talking about love. Well, what kind of love, And we nailed them. But the thing is that that the show, the producers of the show were very conservative, obviously, because they took out all of these wonderful responses we had, and it made it look like it was more even-sided than it was.
Classic editing. I mean, it's always. They always get the last word somehow in the edit room, Yeah. The edit room is where the best things are taken out, right.
But it was. I can say that we massacred him on the station. We made him out for the fool he was, and he was. I mean, there's no doubt about it. He was Here's a little background on McClendon. He was. He was a friend of Jack Ruby's.
Is that right? Of course. Is that right?
Yeah.
Well,
so he meddled around in some
circles that are a little questionable to say the least.
Pretty bad circles there. So he was by no means somebody who was capable of pointing the finger, like most of them.
An angel.
Yeah, I always say, you want to fight the real scumbag, you follow the pointing finger up the arm.
Oh, Larry, I got to say, he's been such a incredible conversation talking with you and getting all these great stories and details. And there's so much. I have a lot more to cover. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. But I wanted to first. I got to ask: have you ever considered, putting some of these stories in a book and doing, your own autobiography?
Well, it's interesting. I've been approached by a literary agent that wants me to do that very thing, and but I've just been so damn busy that I haven't even had time to sit down and write anything. I do have some things that I wrote on Facebook, some of our adventures, and I'm certainly going to incorporate them. But to actually sit down and start doing this, I haven't done it yet.
That takes some time. Well, I got to ask, like I said before, you guys had played some shows. You had a record that come out, I guess, not too long ago. Do you have what is next for the Standells? Do you have any shows coming up in 2017, or any kind of new things that you could share with us?
We have a lot right now, a lot of good possibilities, but nothing is really firmed up. We're kind of particular in the kind of gigs we do, and unless they're good paying for a good audience, we just don't want to do them. A lot of people don't realize this. We're not kids anymore. Although I do feel like a kid when I go on stage,
right.
But we're not, and we don't go out and do this for the experience or for the exposure. That means nothing to me. So they have to be good gigs, and that's exactly why we haven't played in Los Angeles for very much, except for this last concert we did.
Right.
Is that very thing? Is that they want you to play for free here,
of course.
And we just won't do it.
And they can catch you on Facebook. And what's the Standells official website is?
Yes, it's standellsofficial.com.
Standellsofficial.com, and of course you have
Standells, Standells-official, and that's our website. But our Facebook page, we keep pretty current on things that are happening, so people can always go there to find out what's taking place. And then I have my own Facebook page. That I've got about 3,900 friends now, so getting kind of full. I always like to tell stories, and
sure.
And that's the most fun thing, on the stage. Our sound went out on the stage, and they really screwed it up in this concert. And so I just stood up there and told stories,
Right.
And people got the biggest kick out of that. Just me telling Stixie stories.
I mean, that could be a new theme for a different tour. You never know.
Yeah. So the same thing happened to Rick, and he didn't take it so well.
Right.
But I've seen that so many times. You do a good show and you do as good as you can. If the sound crew screws it up, there's not much you can do.
Right.
And the audience understood.
Absolutely.
They know, and we just go, we have a good time, and most of the people do. We put on a show. We don't just stand up and do our music.
Right.
I actually go out into the audience, and I'll grab some woman and sing to her, and we do a real show.
That's great. Well, I'm looking forward. Next time you guys make it back to San Francisco, please let us know, and we would love to,
yes.
Maybe play some of the new record and promote the program. So it would be really nice.
Well, thank you.
Well, Larry, I want to thank you so much for taking your time out and sharing all of this great history with us. And we really honestly wish you the best of luck in 2017 and the best of success and continuing the historic Standells, keeping it alive. We want to thank you so much.
Oh, well, thank you. And I appreciate being on the show.
Absolutely. Well, take care, Larry, and hopefully we'll talk to you soon in the future.
Okay.
You got it. Take care. Bye-bye.
All right.
There he is. Of the Standells, Larry Tamblyn.